Thank you so much for coming. So what we have here is a murderer's row of comedy editors. This is something I've wanted to put together for a very long time, to have the best editors for print and web comedy that you could find anywhere, all in the same place, all at once, giving advice for how to get published, how to go from dreaming about getting your comedy published to making it a reality. And I went to Tulane, and I can tell you that I felt from going to point A to point B, point A being Tulane, point B being published, it was almost impossible. I had no idea how to do it, but it is very doable. It may seem impossible, but it can be done. So what we have 4 fantastic guests who flew in for this. We have Emma Allen from The New Yorker, Lauren Moser from The Onion, Beth Newell, Reductress, and Chris Monk's McSweeney's. Lauren, tell me how you got into the world of The Onion. This is not an easy world to get into. I tried to submit headlines for years, and I couldn't get in, and a lot of friends couldn't either. You just can't submit as an outsider, right? It can take years to get into that orbit. So how did you do that?
I got very lucky with timing. A lot of the reason why I'm have my job right now is part skill and part luck. The luck part came because I went to college, and I went to Brown University, and we had a satire magazine called The Brown Noser, very collegiate, and it was basically our version of The Onion on campus. I sent in headlines, I got in, and for 4 years, I basically just trained myself in Onion voice. And at the end of that tenure, we got an email from The Onion saying that they were doing this thing called the fellowship program, which is basically a 6-month audition where you can go into the Onion writer's room, spend 6 months just honing your craft. You write headlines, articles, interact with the room. It's the best practice, the best crash course you can ever have. And so they reached out, and I was of course I'm going to apply. I, of course, didn't get it the first time I applied, but I was really persistent. And a year after graduation, I got the fellowship program, and I flew out to Chicago and never left.
So what are some suggestions for those out in the audience who may want to contribute headlines? Is it doable? Can one submit headlines if you're not a part of working at The Onion? Can you do it from an outside standpoint?
Oh, yeah. I mean, one really cool thing about The Onion right now is we just restarted our fellowship program. So I've been telling people, if you want to write headlines for The Onion, submit to our fellowship application. It's due fairly soon. And what's the second part of the question?
Well, just if it's doable. I mean.
Oh, yeah. It's doable, but I would say it's not easy. The best advice I ever got when I was submitting for the fellowship for the first time was basically tear yourself down to the studs and rebuild yourself in the image of The Onion. Get to it was very intimidating.
It's definitely not a cult.
No, yeah, not a cult. But yeah, I spent months just studying The Onion's humor, headline form, setup, punchline, just poring over this 30-year archive, which was the best studying tool I've ever had. And when I was done with that, I'd written 500 headlines and thrown them out because I knew they were garbage. And then by the time I submitted, I was a much better writer.
What would you suggest not doing? Are there common mistakes you see with those who submit headline entries?
Oh, yeah, all the time. So one of my biggest pet peeves is just not knowing basic Onion form. So I always recommend just getting the absolute bare bones basics down of stuff noticing that we write in AP style. We use news voice. We don't sound like clickbait. We don't use the words I or my. It's not first person, it's third person. So that is a very basic thing. Also, just seeing stuff we capitalize every word in our headlines. If I see somebody send in an application and there's no capitalization, I'm absolutely not. You have not read The Onion. So just kind of that bare bones stuff. And then also submitting jokes that we've done before. It's a tough proposition because we have a 30-year history, but I always tell people, if you have a joke and it sounds familiar, Google it, type it into Google, and if it pops up with an old Onion headline, there you go.
Is it an advantage or disadvantage to have a headline based on current events if you're submitting for the first time?
I think it's good to show that you can like write about the news and comment on topical stuff, but I would say if it's too topical and if it's a news story that isn't going to last for like a few weeks, I wouldn't submit it because it takes a while to read through everybody's applications.
Emma Allen, like the world of The Onion, the New Yorker world is a very difficult one to enter. What's your entry story?
My entry story? I was working freelance in sort of art journalism, writing a parody column about the art world for The Observer. And I managed to get a meeting with an editor at The New Yorker who had no job for me. But I went in, and then I called my mom when I left, and I said, I can die now because I've been inside the New Yorker offices. And then a job opened up some months later, and I found this out in a very un-HR approved way because the editor texted me, have you moved to China at like 10 o'clock at night? And I was like, I can. Like, is that what you're looking
Susan?
for? Yeah. Yeah.
So you became the New Yorker editor. Is this true? The cartoon editor, was it at 29?
It's like, yeah, that seems right.
The youngest ever and the first female cartoon editor, as well as becoming the editor of Shouts and Murmurs. So what is it like taking on a job like that? There weren't that many before you. I mean,
There were 3 before me in 100 years.
it's incredible. So what was the pressure like for that?
Oh, it was no pressure. It was just like I just waltzed in and I was, no, the pressure was incredible. I basically was like blacked out for the first 2 years from fear that I was gonna like break the New Yorker. And so far, I haven't. So it's every passing week I become a little more confident. Yeah.
Because you are dealing with writers and cartoonists who have been there decades.
Yeah, no. So when I started, I was 29, and like my first week of seeing cartoonists, it was like George Booth, Sam Gross, Ed Koren. It was all these cartoonists in their 80s and 90s, and I thought they were all gonna, be like, who the hell are you? But they are cartoonists and humor writers generally. I think are very incredibly sweet and somewhat neurotic, and they were all just sort of like, yes, who are you? But then as soon as they realized that I was more afraid of them, sort of like a bear or a snake kind of situation, they were like, we're going to be fine.
So you're also the editor are you the editor of Shouts for the print version or just the Daily Web?
I edit some of the print shouts, sort of by writers in my stable who I'm bringing up from.
Or let's explain what a Shouts and Murmurs is for those who may know. It's a short form humor piece.
Yeah, short, humorous fiction. That's really the only prerequisite. Tends to be like 400 to 800 words.
So the competition is probably fierce. How many submissions do you receive weekly for Shouts?
Directly to my inbox, probably around 500, and then we have a sort of slush pile or open submission, and there are probably another 1,000 or so there.
If there's those in the audience who want to submit a Shouts and Murmurs, what's the best way to do so?
So there's a submittable, if you Google, Google. Great resource. I don't know that it's working so well anymore because it's just like AI answer, but
Right, yeah.
yeah, if you Google submit Shouts and Murmurs, it is one of the most sort of democratic parts of the New Yorker, which, usually it's like, I want to publish a poem, and it's like, well, have you won a Pulitzer? If you want to publish a humor piece, it's like, is it funny?
Right.
Like, that's really it, which is sort of great. And yes, everything that gets sent in gets read, not necessarily in the most timely manner. So again, if you're like, this is the funniest thing about the thing that happened this week, even if you're sending it to me, I might not read it in time. But yeah.
So as I was asking Lauren, are there things a submitter can do that can improve their chances? And is there something that you see that would make it difficult or impossible for someone to get published if they do a certain thing?
Wow, for a long time, people submitted Dear Sirs. Like, they would send in a piece, and it was like, no one who's reading this is a man. But, yeah, I don't know. It's sort of similar advice, where it's like, read the thing that you're trying to do, and then don't emulate it too closely for Shouts, because, yeah, like in 100 years, you don't want it to just feel sort of tired or like you're just emulating Robert Benchley or something. But know what has been done already, have a sense of the voice and the form and the length. Yeah, I don't know. Jesse Eisenberg and Marv Albert once brought me a cupcake.
Marv Albert?
Yeah.
Why?
Jesse had done a piece about Marv Albert being the sports commentator for his relationship, and then Marv Albert recorded it for our radio show.
Marv Albert.
I'm just saying, if you can bring Marv Albert,
It can't hurt.
me.
He was a long-time sports announcer for New York City teams who got
Yes.
into a bit of trouble,
I forgot about that.
which I won't get into now. But let me ask you this, and I'm going to
Real
ask this
pivot.
often. Is it advantageous or is it an advantage or a disadvantage for a new writer to submit a piece that's tethered to the current news? Because there's oftentimes a better chance it'll be published, but they're not necessarily read as quickly as the consistent submittals.
Yeah, I would say pretty much the same thing, where it's like if you knock it out of the park, it is proof that you were really good at writing something that's reactive to the news and like timely political satire. It doesn't mean that's going to be the first piece you get published. It's good proof of concept for you as a writer, but yeah, probably not your best chance at immediately getting a yes.
Does it take longer for new submitters to have their work read?
Well, again, it's like if you're not submitting directly, yes, it takes slightly longer, but again, everything does get read eventually. And if, once you start to be someone who I know and whose work I like, I'll probably invite you to submit directly or, make sure I look at your submission sooner, so yeah.
Beth Newell, you along with Sarah Papalardo co-founded one of my favorite sites, Reductors. Can you tell me how that came about?
Sure, yeah. So I actually had interned at The Onion for the Onion News Network a while back, and I...
What year? I'm sorry.
This was, I interned in around 2009.
Oh my gosh.
And so I knew even though it was the Onion News Network, I was working under Carol Kolb, who was one of the original Onion people, and so it was the same kind of format of having a pitch meeting, and as the intern I would compile all the pitches and circle the ones that they had selected and send out the emails and all that. So I knew the system, and I had gotten the internship through, I had heard about it through a friend at UCB where I was doing improv, and I went on from there later to start doing sketch comedy, and the theater I was at the time didn't have a lot of women in the program. So we started doing these free workshops and sketch shows with just women and getting a bunch of women in the room who I think were just more scared to do sketch. And, improv gender was starting to balance out where improv teams were becoming a little bit more 50-50 with women, but the sketch program was not like that. So we got all these women together, and instantly it was just everyone laughing like crazy in these rooms at each other's ideas, and I thought it was so funny because I had previously been in rooms where there'd be one or two women in the room, and you wouldn't get that kind of reaction because the men didn't necessarily know all the reference points. And so from that, I sort of later on had this random late night idea where I was oh, there should be a fake women's magazine, and it was one of those things where I was I know if I don't say this to someone right now, it's just never gonna happen. And so I emailed Sarah middle of the night or whatever, and I was this is a crazy idea, and I was it's gonna be so much work, but do you wanna do this? Do you wanna put together a website? And so we put together a bunch of headlines. We wrote maybe 60 articles, just the two of us, and it took us I don't know, I want to say 3 or 4 months. We just were trying to make it look like a real website because we were otherwise we're not going to stick with this and everyone's going to be what are you what's your little blog, we were we have to make this look legit. So we launched, and then I think within a week or two we had a cease and desist from a cosmetics company, and it was oh, okay, I guess now we have to become an LLC.
So you didn't go through the legal preparations before you started Reductors?
No, we just thought we were putting up a website. I thought it was our little project, it was just trying to get eyes on our work because we're comedians, and you're how do you get anyone to pay attention to you? So we were let's just make a thing.
So what year was this?
We launched in 2012.
Okay, so that's amazing to me that there wasn't a voice for female comedy writers or improvisers, comedians out there that you can see nowadays. So we're not talking about that long ago.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think around that time, Inside Amy Schumer came out, and there was like starting to be more of like a women's focus, but it still was like a lot of people being like, "Hey, what about women? Like, have you heard of us?" Like,
And it was a big hit right away, right?
yeah, we got like a surprising amount of attention at the time, which is why we also were like, "Oh, I guess we have to become an LLC."
Well, this is something I'm going to ask the rest of the participants, but when you're an editor-in-chief, when you're the decider when it comes to comedy pieces, it can be a difficult job, right? How long did you work at that job? You eventually left, but how many years did you work as an editor?
I was doing it for 7 years, and so it was kind of, at the start, we were just like two people meeting at a coffee shop. We weren't like, and then slowly we were like, okay, we need to get like a co-working space and become a real company and hire people. But so, yeah, it was always like a little bit weird because people would, not that anyone thought we were as big as The Onion, but people would talk about us in relation to The Onion, and we were kind of like, okay, but those people have decades of time and funding and like staff, and we're like still like a couple of people like trying to make things happen. So it is a lot of pressure, I think, for any of us, but especially when you're like, well, we don't actually have the resources that you think we have, but we also have to pretend that we do have them so that people will take us seriously.
How did you do as far as telling people that their piece wasn't chosen? Not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, it's not easy. We started coming up with, at one point, we had like a form email just kind of explaining some of what you guys talked about, which is just like, we may have done a headline like this already and you might not have seen it, or just we get so many pitches on a given topic and we can't do all of them. And so we would try to explain that to people. People still get hurt. And then sometimes, it's just like a weird thing because you don't know which way the wind is blowing. So it's like sometimes someone pitches something and it doesn't feel right for that day because of other stuff you have going up on the site. But then 2 weeks later, you accept something similar, and then the first person is mad that you took the second person's idea. And it's like, there's just so much going on in the office that you wouldn't know about as a contributor. And so you can't, it's just hard.
It is hard.
Yeah.
Chris Monks, first of all, I want to thank you for coming out. I know you don't like to travel.
This is salt at all, actually. Yeah.
This is a quote, if I'm allowed. I dread it. I just want to be home in my pajamas reading submissions, which I love.
I know, it's kind of sad, but it's me.
That's talk about your background and how you became the editor of McSweeney's Online.
Originally I fancied myself a very serious writer of short stories, and I took a lot of creative writing classes in college, and Laurie Moore was one of my writing professors, and so I was going to be a serious author. And then we had kids, and I became a stay-at-home dad, and I had suddenly 3 hours in the day because both our sons were incredible nappers, and so I just started writing. And this was right around the time that blogs were coming up.
What year was this?
1948. No, the early 2000s.
Okay.
Yeah. I think I wrote this semi-fictional dad blog called Utter Wonder, and I started that in like 2002 or 2003. And so I started writing just little funny, silly pieces, mainly just for me to get out of my system. And I slowly started getting a following, nothing huge, modest. And then I started writing things that I was like, oh, actually, maybe there could be a place other than my silly little blog for this stuff. So I started looking around, Googling, and
We're all here
go to Google.
being paid a hefty fee.
Exactly, yeah. And then I saw McSweeney's, and I'd already been a fan of Dave Eggers, who's the founder of McSweeney's. His memoir is one of my favorite books of all time. I'm of that age where it's just the book that spoke to me. And I was like, all right, this is going to be my goal for the next year, to try to get something in McSweeney's. And I wrote and submitted and got rejected and rejected and rejected. And then I finally got something through, and I don't know if you guys agree, but once you get something through, it's a little bit easier to get your next thing in. And so I got another thing in, and then another thing, and I developed a rapport with John Warner at the time, who was editing the site. And around 2006, 2007, he decided that he wanted to take some time off and he needed someone to fill in. Asked me if I was interested. I interviewed for the job, had a really nerve-wracking phone call with Dave Eggers, and I didn't blow it. And I became interim editor in 2007, and then I became permanent editor since then. So I've been there a long, long time.
So you said that after you got the job, you found less inspiration to write yourself. Why is that?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, once you took on the job, you found less inspiration to do your
Yeah,
own work.
I thought it was going to be exactly the opposite. And I got really sort of immersed in the job, and I still am. Because I'm obviously happily doing it after almost 17, 18 years. And I don't know, there was something about it. I thought that I would, by reading funny work, and I read a lot of funny work, that it would sort of push me to take my work to different places. And it just, I don't know, I still haven't quite figured it out. I mean, I'm still writing, and I like some of what I write. I think every writer will probably say that. But it was also something about the job and just like really enjoying it and enjoying editing it and enjoying sort of giving platforms to new writers and seeing their careers take off.
So how many submissions do you receive at McSweeney's per week?
Probably between 200 and 300 a week.
And how many do you accept?
It varies. I would say probably maybe 5 or 10 a week. I don't know. Some weeks are more than others. I mean, around 2016, we sort of switched up our submissions process, and because we usually weren't super topical, we were sort of topical, and then we became, something happened in 2016. I don't know if you guys are familiar with, and yeah, so the side story is that on election, the day after the election in 2016, we had nothing to run about what had just happened. And I was already disconsolate. and we didn't have anything. And so I was like, we got to figure out a way to solve this. So we changed up our submissions process, and we now have a separate timely submissions email. And the turnaround is 24 hours. So that basically zoomed up our submissions. And so if something huge in the news happens, like for instance, this whole Signal scandal, we got dozens of submissions about it. So it depends on what's happening in the news. And
Well, I was talking to Emma about this last night. So you received a lot of submissions about this current Signal scandal. Does that make it easier or more difficult for a writer? Because there's much more competition, but it is current, and it is out there. People want to read about it. How does McSweeney's feel about the pieces tethered to current events?
It's tough because, like, for instance, the Signal, there's a lot of similar jokes that just sort of are just easy, you know? Like the whole Jeff Goldberg, Jeff Goldblum, Jane Goodall.
So many of them.
And just like similar to what you said about, someone complained about, well, my submission had the Jeff Goldblum joke, and you didn't take that. And I was like, well, I can show you 12 to 15 submissions that have a Jeff Goldblum joke, you know, but I try not to get into it with folks too
Well,
much.
it's like the speed of the news cycle plus the fact that, like, you know, people are posting jokes as soon as they think of them on Twitter or whatever, and it's like then,
exactly.
you know, it's like, what is your responsibility as an editor to make sure that nobody has ever had, and parallel thinking in comedy is like so pervasive. It's like, if you think of a joke, I remember when I started as cartoon editor, I had this cartoon idea that I'd had as like a kid where it's like, you're now being, it's a subway joke, we're now being held by the train's dispatcher, and it's like someone is being held by the train's dispatcher. And it's like my first week, 3 people submitted that joke, and I was like, oh my God, they can read my mind. Which is not what it is, it's just that we all have the same thoughts or jokes.
I think there's also a balance of like, you don't want to do the joke that everyone's pitching, but you also do want to kind of hit the nail on the head of like what the funniest thing of that story is of the day. So like, especially if it's like a serious topic, like if, let's say Trump is doing something that's like hurting someone, like you don't really want the joke to be about how he has like orange skin. You know what I mean? Like you want to like get to the point of like the issue.
Well, how does one stand out? I mean, that's a really interesting point. You want to talk about what's going on. You don't want to be totally evergreen, which means pieces that never go bad. But are there pieces that immediately stand out to you, and what are they? What about these pieces that immediately stand out to you, Emma?
Oh, well, I mean, I think for me, it's, at this point, 13 years at the New Yorker, the volume of stuff that you see means that you are, in fact, seeing a lot of the same things over and over again, and there is just this sort of like magical thing that happens when you either encounter someone whose voice or drawing style is just totally new and weird and great, or a joke where it's like, oh my gosh, this is a thing that everyone has been riffing on for, you know, the 100-year history of the New Yorker, and yet you have found this new way in, which is like useless advice, honestly. It'd be like, do it different, like, do it new.
Make it good.
Make it good, but like also just like totally original. But that is what it is. And like I look at 1,500 cartoons a week, and like I buy 15. So it's like, of that, you know, probably 500 are like, okay, seen this has been done. 500 are like, this is sort of, and that, but still, it's like the amount of culling that's going on means that like to really stand out, it has to really stand out.
Now, how about for you, Beth, at Reductors? What stood out for you when you saw these headlines?
Well, I think we always had kind of a mix where it's like, you know, you'd have something going on in the news like Me Too, and you want to make a point about sexual assault, and I think those are important and are like sort of a release valve for the rage you're feeling at the time, but you're not necessarily like always laughing out loud or like going back to those ones. And then there's the headlines that are just like super dumb, and it's like, can you have sex with the girl on top? If he dies, he dies. You know, like, and just like these stupid, like, just like just really dumb stuff. And I think those are the ones that like my brain goes back to, where you're like, yeah, that's funny. But you do want a mix, like, because you want to speak to what's happening and you want to get your feelings out about it and like have that catharsis. But then you also are just comedians like trying to have a fun day. Yeah.
Lauren, let's talk about the process for The Onion. Once the headlines come in, how many are rejected, how many are accepted, and what happens when a headline is accepted?
Yeah, so we are essentially a sweatshop for jokes. We get probably like 800 headline submissions a week, and we take 20, like if you're lucky. So most of the time I'm pitching things and they're just like, they're going into the void. It's a very intimidating process to pitch headlines because our big meetings are just coming in with a big long list of headlines that you've written and just like reading them out to a totally silent room. Nobody laughs. Some people cough or grunt. You know you've done a good headline if somebody is looking down at their table and they go, sure. 2 sures means you get to the second round. It's demoralizing. I hate my job. But yeah, it's tough because like when you're doing that headline process, like the first reaction is kind of like a gut reaction because it's kind of happening in real time. But a lot of the way that we figure out if headlines work is just like brainstorming and analysis and breaking down headlines. Like we want to make sure every headline like is saying something relevant, has good subtext, isn't a joke we've done before, is short, punchy, loud, gets your attention. There's like a lot of different criteria that we kind of like keep in the back of our minds as we're doing this.
And how does the process begin? The person who submits and has a headline accepted doesn't write the piece, correct?
Right, yeah. When you're assigned an article, it's most of the time not your headline. So if your headline gets through to the second round, the person sitting next to you could be writing the article. One thing that's cool about The Onion is we don't have bylines, and partially that's for safety, partially it's because The Onion is this huge, enormous, multinational conglomerate that's all powerful and just spitting out headlines all the time.
Not a cult.
Not a cult. Google it. But also it's because everybody touches Onion work at every step of the process. So like you write a headline, maybe somebody edits it to make it punchier. Then for the article, somebody else writes the article for your headline, and then we have a read through and somebody else pitches ideas that go into the article, and then there's like 2 layers of editors that like touch your piece. So by the time the thing you've sent in goes to print, it's just like this insane Frankenstein joke monster that everybody has touched.
What happens to those who make the first few rounds, say, and aren't used? Are they used again down the road? Are they saved in a file?
I think they're somewhere in the internet. Usually like when things die or don't get traction, they are just gone. So of the like 780 headlines that don't make it through, like they're just never touched or thought about again.
So I want to open this up to all of you, and I have friends who write for late night, and there's a real frustration on their parts that they've been writing for 8, 12, whatever years, and they don't feel that their jokes are effective. They feel like their jokes are almost pebbles thrown against the Pentagon. Is there a frustration on your part working so hard on comedy sites, and it doesn't really seem to move the needle at all politically?
Yeah, I think. I mean, similarly, we, at Reductress, like, we were always trying to sort of make fun of a lot of, like, white liberal people, kind of, like, it's easy to hate Trump and everything, but it's like, you kind of want to critique the people who are open to critique and sort of push the needle that way, and when Hillary didn't get elected, we had been spending a lot of the lead up to that sort of, like, thinking, well, she'll win, and then we'll critique her from the left more, and then that didn't happen, and we had to go promote a book like that the week of that was called How to Win at Feminism. And we were like, and everyone was asking us, like, so what now, like, what do you, we're like, I don't know, we don't know, like, we were wrong, we were all so yeah, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out the answer to that, and I guess I sort of feel like you just keep trying to say what you're gonna say, and hopefully it has some influence in the world. But maybe, I mean, I have kids, so it's nice to think of, like, I can hopefully mold these people for, like, a better tomorrow, and, like, not, like, nothing necessarily is going to change in the next 5 minutes. Like, he'll still be our president. So you do what you can,
Chris, you let out a guffaw before. Do you have?
I did have a thought, yeah.
If I may use that word.
So, yeah, I think similar to what was said already, it's like it is easy to sort of mock Trump and to make fun of him. But what he's doing is incredibly serious, and it's hard to write satire about some of the stuff that's going on. And so the kind of political satire I like is satirizing the response to what is going on. So, like, one of our biggest pieces in the past couple of weeks is about Chuck Schumer. And a lot of people think he's been pretty ineffective in sort of fighting the good fight. And so I think it's really important to sort of, even though it's important to sort of keep our eyes on the ball and on Trump and MAGA, but it's also important to sort of make sure that the folks that we are hoping will help us also are sort of kept in check. And I don't think satire right now is going to change the world. I think we're not Jonathan Swift right now. And from my perspective, it's like satire, for me anyway, provides a comfort because I know that there are really funny, smart people out there who have a similar worldview as me. So, and it sort of really helped this past election. All the stuff we got in just made me feel a little bit better. And I think that's what I'm sort of focused on. When I select something, it's like, who's gonna read this? Who's gonna take something from it? There's no one from the MAGA world who is reading McSweeney's regularly, At the same time, I don't want to sort of just, cave in to just being incredibly, pro-Democrat, pro-left. I want to also keep ourselves in check, too. So it's like a balance.
I mean, has satire ever changed? You mentioned.
Yeah, I was just gonna be like.
I'm not sure. I mean, so if it doesn't change, so what's its purpose?
Well, I mean, I was just gonna say that, like, I don't know, satire changing the world is one thing. Pebbles at the Pentagon is a great book title, but for me, it's more like the notion that humor can sort of infiltrate people's minds and cross, otherwise impenetrable political divides that now are more divided than ever, and, like, it's not necessarily that someone's going to wake up and like read a headline or a cartoon and be like, wait a second, I was wrong this whole time, or like, I finally see Trump, what a goon. But like, no, but I do think it's like humor can play all these different roles, where it's like the sort of political satire can take on people in power and needle them and expose sort of like, you know, from both sides, expose their sort of like lies and posturing and like ridiculousness. But then it also can be this huge relief from it. And it's like sometimes I feel, especially with the New Yorker, you like lure people in with like, you like dog cartoons. and then it's like, and also maybe, like you can see why this is funny. So yeah, I mean, I think people love to do like Swiftian parodies and submit them, and they're not funny now. And like, I think that is sort of a problem, where it's like you have to, in order to sort of, you know, change people's hearts and minds, you have to be in our business making them laugh. And for me, it's like, sure, maybe it's not going to change anything, but like, you have to wake up and do something that doesn't feel like just like watching The Real Housewives and like crying into your pillow, which is also an option. But like, yeah, to have, this is one avenue, and there have to be so many working, I think, in tandem for anything to change.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, go for it.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think it's like, sometimes it's more of like a catharsis for the people who are fighting the fight rather than like being the fight. Like it's sort of just helping people feel seen, and especially like when we were doing a lot of Me Too related headlines at Reductress, I think there was a lot of just women like looking at each other and being like, oh wow, that's happened to all of us, like all of these things like that just weren't being talked about. So I think, yeah, sometimes it's just like shedding some light on it in a way where you realize like how connected you are to other people.
Yeah, we had an interesting experience at The Onion, just like going back on this like catharsis thing, because I do think that right now, like the Onion is very like cathartic for its readers and also for like journalists who are having trouble covering the current events right now. So I know we get kind of passed around in those pools. And when Chuck Schumer recently received a lot of backlash, we had like received a lot of like positive comments from people who were relating to what we were doing. But going back to your throwing a pebble at the Pentagon thing, we had heard that those articles that we'd written had been passed around Congress and had made their way to Nancy Pelosi. And we were like, oh my gosh, like, is this gonna actually change anything? And apparently her response to our headline was, what's the onion? So that pretty much sums it up for us right now.
The more you know, you know?
The more you know. I hope we taught her something very valuable.
For anyone out there who wants to get into comedy writing, I made a lot of mistakes when I first started. I'll give you some examples. I used to copyright my work. Yes. I used to try to make the pitch funny. What do you see immediately? And it's like, this is not happening. I don't care how good the piece is. Grammatical mistakes, things that just immediately set off, this is a beginner. I don't want to work with this person, Chris.
I mean, it's a real basic thing, but just it's really important to read the submission guidelines of the place you're submitting to, and it's really good to read the pieces from the places you're submitting to. It seems like common sense, but a lot of people, I'm sure they have common sense in other parts of their lives. Those are my two recommendations. I mean, so like one mistake is submitting about something that we just ran, something like literally once a week it happens where someone will submit something, but the same subject of a piece that is front and center on our site that day. And then not following the submission guidelines is just like, it just drives me crazy. It's just, because we're like, it may not seem like it, but we're like professionals. This is our job, and so if you don't read the submission guidelines, it's like, it feels like you're not taking it seriously, and I like to think I take my work seriously, my funny work seriously. So that would be, I mean, those are basic, but that's the two off the top of my head.
Would you agree with that, Beth?
Yeah, and I think there has to be a certain level of humbleness with like understanding that writing is like a shots on goal process. Like you're talking about with this, like having to write headline after headline. It's like at Reductress we would take maybe like 10 per person or maybe more, a little more if they were feeling like it. But you maybe are going to get one of those, if that, and that's a person who's already been vetted through the process of being accepted as a writer. So it's like occasionally someone like gets your email some other way and just wants to like give you a headline, and they're not even accepted to be a writer yet, and it always feels like they think they're doing you a favor because they came up with this like funny thing, but you're like, no, we don't need your help. Like you're not. It's people who are like not even writers. You know what I mean? Like so, it's like, no, this is like a thing that we've all been working on and like doing over and over again, and unfortunately, it takes more effort than just like one thought.
Lauren?
Yeah, I think definitely what you both said, like read the guidelines, like, be respectful. I feel like some people aren't good at like kind of taking their lumps. Like we've all talked about how all of our jobs are like, it's a process. It takes a long time to like get anything through to these publications, but like trying is good. But like, if you start sending me scary emails because I'm rejecting you, I'm probably not going to be on your side.
Yeah. Well, in addition to Dear Sirs, people also, for Shouts and Murmurs, this has become less true over the years, I think, but that I've worked there, but they'll be like, this is more of a shouts than a murmur, which doesn't mean anything. And then it'll be like a personal essay about like how their cat got cancer, and it'll just be like, oh my God. No, but I think I agree with everything that everyone has said, and I think there's a step beyond submitting where when especially new writers get pieces in, and I then spend a lot of time carefully editing the piece to make sure it like really reads like a New Yorker piece, and then I send it to them, and then they're like, can we stat everything? Like, can we just like, all of the changes you've made, can we go back to how it was? And it's like, no.
I mean, that's some real nerve. If you get into the New Yorker and then you start steading means to cross out the advice that you got from the professional editor. My advice to those who get in, certainly for the first time, maybe even years, be okay with it. You're dealing with the top editors in the world here.
But like, yeah, I know. I know. It's still for me like being edited is an eviscerating process. Like you like have really poured yourself into this thing, and then every single change can feel like a blow, a personal blow. But at the end of the day, the long-term relationship is probably more important. So like pick one thing to instead.
Oh, just one thing? That's good advice. Just you can step one thing. But one of the great things that I love about hearing about all these submissions is the interest with young comedy writers wanting to write for print. When I was first starting off, it seemed like most people wanted to write for TV or the movies. Where do you see the future of print comedy going? Is it going to a new generation coming up, showing interest in this?
I got to answer that one.
All the industries you just mentioned are essentially dead. Print, TV, film. So, I mean, it's sort of an exciting moment because it's not like one is ascendant and one is, everything is reinventing itself, which is a time to, experiment, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like nostalgia has really helped us out. Like,
Yeah.
The Onion, like, for so long was only a print publication, and then in 2013, due to like having a vaguely evil parent company, like shut down our print edition. But this year we brought it back, and I feel like that nostalgia has propelled us to like such a new level of like excitement. Like we have a lot of like younger kids, like their parents giving them the print edition, and like these 10, 12-year-olds who are probably too young to read it, like getting really genuinely excited, and it like makes me excited for the future.
Right, and what Emma said is so important. If you're a young comedy writer, there could be an advantage to getting your stuff published in the New Yorker or the Onion.
Oh, definitely. I mean, yeah. I mean, particularly the New Yorker and the Onion and Reductress, but also McSweeney's. I mean, there's a ladder, and I won't say where McSweeney is on that ladder, but we're down. We're close to the ground. But I mean, you look at the writing staffs of late night comedy shows, and it's like McSweeney's writers, Onion writers, Reductress writers, Shouts writers. It still is a great stepping stone.
Well, I had my pick of anyone to invite. These are the top 4, and they all accepted. So I want to thank everyone for Emma Allen, Lauren Moser, Beth Newell, Chris Monks. Chris and Beth will be signing their books in the book tent. Thank you so much.